Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Lambert Podcast. This is Sister Darnisha C. Pickett, past matron of Bright Ray Chapter number 136 in Henning, Tennessee. And I also serve Excelsior Grand Chapter, Order of the Eastern Star, Tennessee Jurisdiction, Prince Hall affiliation as its Grand CCFC. I almost forgot the whole thing. Today, I have a very special guest with me today. If you have seen the flyer, of course, you know I have with me Brother Dave Gillarm Jr. How you doing, Brother Dave?
Outstanding. How about yourself?
All right, good to have you. And today we'll be talking about influential women in the jurisdiction of Georgia. So, Brother Dave, you'd like to go ahead and say some beginning words, introduce yourself?
All right. I have the pleasure of serving as past master at Mount Pisgah Lodge, number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia, where Brother Brandon Dura serves our worshipful master. I have the pleasure of serving as the worshipful grand historian of the most worshipful Prince of Carolina, Georgia, where the Honorable Corey Shackelford Sr. serves our 18th worshipful grand master. I'm also a past district worthy patron of the Columbus Fourth Masonic District, where Deidre Wilson serves as our grand worthy matron, and Brother Cecil James is our grand worthy patron. It's just a pleasure, it's an honor to be here. I'm always excited to talk about Georgia, period. So definitely looking. Excited about tonight.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I know that I've said this in the Facebook group before, but Brother Dave is actually a very important piece of the puzzle on why the Lambert podcast came about or how it came about. Many of you know my initial thought was to do a blog, and he kind of planted the seed in my head to actually do a podcast, and I'm glad that he did because it's turned out to be a great thing and building community with sisters and brothers all over. So thank you so much for that, Brother Gillon.
Anytime.
All right. Without further ado, we'll get into our topic tonight. We're talking about the amazing influence of sisters in the Georgia jurisdiction. So I'm going to hand the floor over to my special guest.
All right. I was like starting to do some work on sisters in the jurisdiction. I've done stuff over the years, and I started to poll and ask a couple of sisters about um, who they feel like influential sisters were in the jurisdiction. Two names regularly pop up, and that is Viola Hartfelton and Sister Vashti Grimes Pullen. It's like everybody knows Sister everybody loves her. You can't help but to love her if you're around her. She's probably one of the most amazing sisters that I think I've ever met. She's always had a smile on her face. Um, but me or my personality, I try to look at sisters that don't get talked about as much. And now I am going to talk about past Grand Matron Viola Hartfelton. But one of the most important sisters I think the jurisdiction has that does not get talked about is Sister Dorothy Edwards. Sister Dorothy Edwards served as the first Grand Worthy Matron of Georgia. Her tenure was cut short. She died in office in 1901. So that was a distinction that I don't know if you really want to call it a distinction that Georgia has, where not only did our first Grand Worthy patron die in office in July 1901, that was past Grand Patron William Terry. We also had the Grand Worthy matron Dorothy Edwards die a couple of months later in October. So I guess that would really been significant. So prior to the formation of the Grand Chapter of the Order of Eastern Star, or the first chapter being established, there was an organization called the Ladies Masonic Aid Society. It was essentially the Order of Eastern Star But the degrees hadn't been conferred yet. They did some of the same things, like such as in January 1894, the Ladies Masonic Aid Society of Eureka Lodge Number 1 was formed, and Dorothy Edwards became the first president of it. She was so instrumental over the years because when Eureka Lodge formed in 1866, they had to lay the cornerstone to St. Philip's AME, but they didn't have any regalia. So she made it for them. So that was, if you think about that, they had this monumental task of laying a cornerstone for a historic AME church, which now we will call a historic AME church. And they didn't have any regalia, and she was the one that made it for them. So from the beginning, from the I guess the genesis of Masonry in the state of Georgia, you've always had a female there to help assist. Then you had the Ladies Aid Society. The Ladies Aid Society was they would hold dinners, they would hold fundraisers, they would help raise money. They would do if the lodge had a function, they may provide the refreshments. So they were very important in making sure the lodge's events were successful. Then we had 4 years later, with the first Eastern Star chapter being established, which would be elect chapter number 1, which was chartered by DC, and Dorothy Edwards became the first worthy matron of that chapter. So now we're going to fast forward to now we have the Grand Chapter formed in 1899, this year later. Dorothy Edwards again becomes the first Grand Worthy Matron. And the Grand Chapter makes a donation to the Orphans Home, which was established by the Grand Patron. Their first donation was about $100, which in today's money equals about $3,000. So they were already interested in or invested in helping to establish this home, which was going to be for the wives and the orphans of Masons. Then you have one of the principal organizers, which has been Viola Hart Felton, and she does some great things with this orphans home that I'm going to describe in a few. But one of the biggest things that I saw with Dorothy Edwards, she passed away in 1901, as I mentioned earlier. I just happened to be looking through her will. And in her will, she donated, or she willed 2/3 of her estate to the orphans home. So you think about like today's members, it's hard to get a member to put their chapter or their lodge or anything in their life insurance policy or anything. You can't get them to donate $20. Right. But she donated 2/3 of her estate to the orphans home. This was something that she really believed in. And you think about what it took. She had other money. She was a very established person in Savannah. She donated, a couple $100 here and there to different various people, but she wanted to make sure that this orphans home that was established just, a couple of years prior would survive. And she donated her estate. She ordered her executor to sell everything that she had. That he didn't have to go through the court. He didn't have to get no further permission from anybody to sell everything that she had and give 2/3 of it to the orphans home. So I feel that was very significant. Then you have Viola Hart Felton, who served as the Grand Worthy Matron after her. And then Dr. H.R. Butler, who served as the Grand Master with his wife, Selena Butler. Now, one thing that's interesting about Dr. Butler, he said this at a banquet, and he was talking about Viola Hart Felton. And he's talking about how much stuff they had in common. And I don't know how many people from our jurisdiction even know this. So Butler is talking about how he came into office after the death of the Grand Master, and how Viola Hart Felton came into office after the death of the Grand Worthy Matron. So he felt like that was one thing they had in common. The second thing was they were also born on the same day, just in different years.
Oh, wow.
So, so he was talking about all the connections, and they had a great working relationship. And Selena Butler was so instrumental um, with the education of jurisdiction and also with the orphans home as well. She was so instrumental, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, that in 1922, Selena Butler organized a book shower for the orphans home. She wanted people all over to send her books. That way, the orphans home could have a library. Uh, and that was her thing. She even took out an ad in the Savannah Tribune, which at the time was the official organ of the Grand Lodge and the Grand Chapter. And she was reminding the membership to send all their books so that way that she could donate them to the orphans home, so that these kids would have books to read. So the sisters were always instrumental. They always look at that orphans home. That was their baby. Um, Viola Hart was very instrumental in the orphans home and just things in the jurisdiction period. She's most known for having served over 30 years as Grand Worthy Matron, but she was a force to be reckoned with in the community. Everybody knows about Madam C.J. Walker and what Madam C.J. Walker did. Viola Hart Felton also was a manufacturer of hair care products. And she had a very successful hair care product business in Americas. That's where her money came in. She owned her own home. When the Grand Chapter became part of the Interstate Conference of Grand Chapters, she paid the fees personally for the Grand Chapter. So this wasn't just a woman that was thrown into this position because maybe she had an influential husband. She was actually somebody in the community and somebody that had a lot of money and a lot of influence to get stuff done. The same thing with Selena Butler. Grandmaster Butler was a very serious person. He was very established, but I'm almost willing to bet that Miss Butler was a lot more popular than him. The stuff that she did with the children, which also transferred into the orphans home, starting the National Colored Parent Teachers Association. So one thing that the Grand Chapter did in keeping the orphans home established, and I'm just focused on that for a few minutes, is they donated roughly about $4,000 per year to the orphans home. They kept it going. When the orphans home was damaged by a lightning strike in around 1910, the Grand Chapter was there to help raise funds to get this orphans home back up and running. It was, and then Pearl Chapter, who was one of the local chapters, they were also instrumental as well. So
you said something earlier
mm-hmm.
that really, really, I guess, hit home with me because when I was doing research on one of our past Grand Worthy matrons, which is not from the area in which I reside. So when I do that type of research, I usually contact, that area to see what work is already being done. And so one of the long conversations that I had with this gentleman, kind of in that situation, he felt that if anything was done, it would be done in her husband's name, and then her name would be added. And I'm like, well, wait, she was, alone. She did amazing things. So it's kind of downplaying what she did if you say, well, if we do something, we're going to do it in his name, and then we'll just add her name to it. And so that was very important to know, is that these women, they kind of earn their keep as being movers and shakers in the community on their own, even though they were teamed with with men who are also movers and shakers in the community.
Yeah, that was a big thing, and it was rare. Like when Dorothy M was the first Grand Worthy Matron of Georgia, she was single. So usually in history, you find women who are in that position, they're also married. And it kind of, the way the story is narrated, that they kind of like tag along with their husbands. And that's how they got in that position. She was unmarried, had no kids, but yet she was in charge of multiple organizations and able to wheel 2/3 of her estate to the orphans home. So that kind of changes that narrative about the women were only there because of their husbands. She was there
Right,
because
right,
she was somebody.
right, right.
Um, and Now with Viola Hart-Felton, she was married. She was married twice, but each time it seems like, even though her husband were significant in Americas, the article always shifted back to her, that her husband passed away, not he passed away and he lives behind his widow. So she was yeah, she was very significant in Americas as well. Um, and even where I'm from in Columbus, we only had one grandmother matron come from Columbus, Georgia, and that was Ruthie Cobb, and she was married to a Dr. Cobb, who was the richest African American in Columbus. But while Dr. Cobb was a dentist and had a very large dental practice, which I'm probably going to expound on at some point on maybe a different platform on how he got to that point. His wife ran the grocery store, and she was very well known for being a grocer in Columbus. So they were a team, but she had her own lane, and she was very influential in Columbus. And ironically, she also this Columbus is only known for having one Grand Worthy Matron and one Grand Master / Grand Worthy Patron, and both of them just so happened to die in office. And past Grand Matron Ruthie Cobb died in office in 1943. So when I started looking at the Art Grant chapter, they've always been there. One of the biggest events in present time was the Prince Hall weekend. That was established around 1959, if memory serves me correctly, by John Wesley Dobbs. The Grand Chapter used that event, and they would always bring their monies to donate to NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
Nice.
So when we think about the civil rights movement, we look at we think of Thurgood Marshall being a Prince Hall Mason and getting help from the Masons, but the Grand Chapters was right there donating their money as well.
Right. Right. Yeah, so that's actually a big deal in many jurisdictions, and especially in this situation, even in sometimes when the Grand Chapter name is not on it, that doesn't mean that they didn't contribute at all um to whatever is going on at that time.
Exactly. Locally, a lot of the sisters would also raise money during World War II for the war savings bonds to help soldiers that were injured and help support the war. So they were always doing something, always looking to support. Looking back to my lodge minutes go back to December 1891. The lodges and the Grand Master were stressing that during the installations, you need to have your wives there. You need to have these members of these chapters, of this chapter there that was there. They want to ensure that the sisters were being included in all these activities. and one sister, I for some reason I don't know why that I can't remember her name off the top of my head. She was married to a member of my lodge, as Dr. Edwin J. Turner. While Dr. Turner was off doing his practice, and she was making her lang as one of the Columbus elites, one of the Columbus elite women, and raising their son Benner C. Turner, who became the fourth president of South Carolina State College. So, and she became the first worthy matron of Star Columbus chapter, which was the first Order Eastern Star chapter in the city of Columbus. This chapter had some of the who's who of Black women in Columbus, such as Elizabeth Canny, who serves as the first treasurer of this chapter. Elizabeth's father was Winter Canny. He was a former slave. So when you think about somebody coming from slavery to now getting his freedom, to opening up a school on his property, to educate his kids, to teach himself to become a veterinarian. Now he has money, steady income, and he sends her to Tuskegee to be educated, and she becomes one of the first graduates of Tuskegee. She comes back to Columbus and teaches school for 52 years. So yeah, that was very significant because she was a member of Star Columbus chapter, Star Columbus number 103. She becomes one of the first graduates of Tuskegee. She becomes a pillar in Columbus as an educator. She was, when Rufie Cobb was growing up, Elizabeth Canny was one of her teachers. And now the legacy that she left in Columbus as being one of the stalwarts in education. Another influential sister, and it's an ongoing GoFundMe for her, is Mary Lee Bussey. Mary Lee Bussey was posthumously named as the first colored superintendent, first Black female superintendent of the Columbus schools. And she was a past matron of Legacy chapter number 482 and past grand lecturer of the Prince Hall Grand chapter of Georgia. She did all the work. She did everything a superintendent would do during her time, but being Black and being a female, she was not given the credit that was due. And so now a local educator, Dr. Judy Purnell, led the charge to get her recognized as the superintendent of the colored schools, Black female superintendent of the colored schools, and is having a portrait commissioned of her. So this was just, even though her husband was very significant, or well, I guess a very influential guy as well, her legacy definitely outshadows his. And she's just one of those more influential Prince Hall Order Eastern Star members that we should all know about. Mm-hmm. So Georgia definitely has some, and their legacy does not necessarily depend on who their husband was.
I really I really like how you reiterate that, because it's just so that's just one of those things that kind of just stick, you know. We know at a certain period it was, Mrs. Joe Smith. You had to really dig to find out what their names were, and things of that nature. And it is important to know that it was a husband and wife team, but I just always like to study, well, really both, but especially the women, because you'll be surprised how much stuff they do in the background. And I love how you reiterate that it's not, they just didn't get passed up up the ladder because of who their husbands were. They were really out here working and working in these positions and shining on their own, in their own lane. So that's very important for us to know. Um, I do have one question. Was there any husband and wife team as far as the grand matron and the grand master, or the grand matron and the grand worthy patron serving together, as far as you know?
No, that's never happened in Georgia. There were sisters that were very influential. Like, so you had, well, we know Dr. Butler and Selena Butler. We also had past Grandmaster Xenophon Lamar Neal and his wife, Julia K. Neal. Julia K. Neal was a very influential sister, very well loved sister in the Grand Chapter. So that was, as far as being able to kind of think about kind of run stuff, Selena Butler will probably be the closest.
One of my favorites too. She's kind of got on that list for me. She's gotten on that list for me.
Yeah. If I wasn't here in New York and I was at home, I could probably access more of my stuff. Selena Butler was not the type of person that she was well educated. She seemed to be an amazing person. She was also a person that you didn't want to play with.
Right.
She kind of lit into the grand chapter, or to the chapters, because as grand lecturer, she was required to visit and give lectures, and that's what she did. But the chapters were not compensating her, and she was not for it. She wasn't hearing any excuse anybody had to say. She wrote a letter to the grand chapter, letting everybody know exactly how she felt. So it was, she was a very, very important person. She was somebody that past Grandmaster Dobbs regularly checked with. He always wanted to know how she was doing. He would always write to her. She'd write to him. She'd tell him how H.R. Butler Jr. was doing and his travels all around the globe. Her work with the Gray Ladies in Fort I think it's pronounced Hayachuca in Arizona. She had done this amazing thing with the children in the PTA, but she was also part of the Gray Ladies as well. So she was doing so many amazing things. So H.R. Butler is great, but Selena Butler is definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Oh yeah. And it's just fantastic because even after she moved to California with her son, she was still active in these organizations, like writing them, sending them money, and I just found it so amazing. Like, she was like, I'm not there, but I'm still going to support.
Yeah. And they kind of go back with Viola Hart Felton, how important she was as well. You mentioned your presentation about Selena Butler, that she visited the Second Pan-African Congress. Viola Hart Felton was there as well, as representing the Grand Chapter. So you think about, when you try to put that in like perspective, you got these Black women that are traveling to the other side of the globe to talk about concerns for us here.
Right.
To me, average people aren't just going to do that. Somebody who just got in that position because of their husband, they're not going to do that. They're not just going along for a vacation in Luxembourg or whatever, but they're going to do that. They cared about the concerns. They were somebody of importance. And they're in the same room as W.E.B. Du Bois and, and all the who's who of the Black community all around the world. And they're right there voicing their concerns. So, and to see that we had at least two members who become the Prince Hall Grand Chapter of what he started the state of Georgia is amazing.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And I would like to say, you mentioned her earlier, Sister Vashti. I've had a few times to meet her, and she is amazing. She's very
Mm,
kind-hearted, and I always enjoy being around her for sure, for sure.
yeah. One of her favorite saying is, "I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it." And she really means that. Uh,
Mhm.
our current grand worthy matron, Deidre Wilson, she's an amazing person. She's somebody that's invested and concerned about the history of the Prince Hall Grand Chapter at Old Asian Star. One event that was just recent was the broken commissary of past Grandmaster Terry. Almost immediately after that ceremony ended, I know she being Grand Worthy Matron, there's a lot of people that's going to walk up and talk to her. They will, hug, take pictures, but you could almost kind of see her vision. She was looking right in the direction of where Ruthie Cobb's grave was. It's like, we need to go over there and we need to go take a picture at her grave. We need to go honor our sister.
Right.
Um, there was times where we was going through some of the grand chapter proceedings, and we were looking at stuff that was during past Grand Matron Fowler Hart tenure, Ruthie Cobb's tenure. We were seeing what the grand chapter was doing during World War II, but she was right there. She wasn't off to the side, really not just like she's just in a position and really doesn't care. She cares about everything with this grand chapter. I don't think there's a detail that's not too small for her. Everything's important. Everything matters to her. And she's an amazing soul as well.
Nice, nice. And that is absolutely amazing. It gives you a different feeling when you go to the grave sites of some of these past
Mm,
grands and things of that nature, and especially in some cases when you see the conditions in which the cemeteries are, you
mm,
know. Um it's like, okay, so we need to do something about that because our grandworthy matron and some other, our past grandworthy matron and other grand chapter officers are also buried in some of these cemeteries. And if nothing else, we need to go and pay respects to that if we can. So that's outstanding. And I did see the ceremony online and it was awesome. It really was.
yeah. I know that's kind of like almost sort of off subject. I
Yeah.
said it right before I started speaking that it's been a long time coming, and it's been an extremely long time. I mean, if this is appropriate, um, I started my research on it roughly around 2009. This was long before I was a grand historian, long before I was even a past master. Um, and I wanted to make sure I was right. So I was double checking, triple checking myself. And once I got to the point where I was sure that he was the Grand Master and the past Grand and the Grand Worthy Patron when he died, I presented it to the District Deputy Grand Master. It was roughly around 2012. Um, he kind of looked at me. He was trying to figure out why nobody else had found this, but I presented my evidence and showed him that this was correct. He was the sitting Grand Master and the Grand Worthy Patron. He took it to the Grand Lodge. Then we went through the verification process because we're talking about over 100 plus years later. Why nobody else had said this before me? And once again, I wasn't the Grand Lodge officer. I had just passed the Trios Worship Master. I got appointed district worthy matron. District worship. District historian on the spot. Um, and it just became kind of overwhelming because I had to produce so much information. I was asked to provide a death certificate for 1901. The state of Georgia wasn't required to have death certificates then. Uh, so uh, being frustrated, beyond frustrated, I was asked to give funeral home records. The funeral home that did his body does not exist. It hasn't been in existence for a long, very long time. So to get asked that, have to find out what funeral home even did his body, that was pretty difficult task. So I had to find the Grand Lodge proceedings. Mind you, I'm not a Grand Officer at this point. Mm-hmm. I have to find the Grand Lodge proceeding, the Grand Lodge records showing that he was the Grand Master. So then I had to go out, I had to figure out where I'm going to even find this stuff from. To acquire all this information, to refute every single question that was being asked of me, or not really refute, to being able to provide information for every question that was being asked of me. And then it got to the point where there was no question that he was a Grand Master and a Grand Worthy Patron. Then it came into designing the column, doing the measurements, being frustrated. And for those, there's a lot of people that may not know about his column. It's actually a combination of 3 separate columns. Since Prince Hall's column was erected in 1895, and with Terry passing away in 1901, I wanted to do something that was close to what that time period was, which means I couldn't use marble. So I started researching different materials, and I came up with China gray granite. So that's what Terry's column is made out of. And that kind of looks almost time period of maybe what Prince Hall's column kind of sort of almost would have looked like when it was erected at that time. The measurements came from past Grandmaster Dobbs' column. So I want to do something that was accurate to his column. The Grand Master's emblem that's on there comes from X.L. Neal's column. So I want to put everything together to make William Terry's. But I had to I had to go to all their columns, figure out what was there. I had to measure it. I had to go through a series of being frustrated with Southview Cemetery because I had to measure every single detail, every single thing, and they wouldn't provide me measurements. So I ended up driving to Atlanta in the rain and measuring Dobbs' column in the rain. So I had to deal with that level of frustration. So when it came to actually coming there on Saturday to seeing that column erected, and this is going through 2 different city sextons, the city lawyer, researching the family. So I had to try to contact living family members. I had to do the ground penetration radar to make sure that if the column extended outside the grave, that it wouldn't be buried over somebody, it wouldn't be placed over somebody else. It was a lot. So my expressions on Saturday was more of kind of this relief. I was kind of glad that this was over, it was done, it was in place. The rest of the emotions really haven't hit me yet, but it was a great thing to be able to honor him. He was an amazing person. I may need to stuff that in the Georgia groups. I want to make sure that everybody knew who he was. So when you came there on Saturday, it wasn't just we honoring a person that died in office and they were the Grand Master. I needed you to know every single detail about this man's life. You need to know who his wife was. You need to know how successful his kids were, what kind of business he operated. So I went 2 weeks. Every day, I gave a different fact about William Terry. So I'll probably need to post them in other groups so people can see that as well. This is one of the most interesting things was we know Tyler Perry. We know what Tyler Perry does. And his most public character is Medea. But he wasn't the first person to dress up as a woman and be in a play, and that was William Terry. He did. And I provided proof of him dressing up as a woman and being in a play. He was the main character. So I want to bring him to life. So because our people, just like today, our grandmasters, grand matrons, they're people. They have a life outside of masonry. and I wanted you to know what his life was outside of masonry. And him being the grand worthy patron also kind of gets pushed to the side a little bit. I feel get pushed to the side a little bit as well, because we had Saul C. Johnson, who served for 50 years as grand worthy patron. And he meant everything to the grand chapter. 50 years as grand worthy patron.
Jeez. Okay.
Yes. He was elected as Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge during William Terry's tenure as Grand Master. Saul C. Johnson became the first Grand Worthy Patron, well, not Grand Worthy, first worthy patron in Georgia when he became worthy patron of elected chapter. And Terry was serving as District Deputy Grand Patron. So William Terry kind of get pushed to the side, but thinking about the women, so far I have not found where, I tried to find where Terry's daughters were members of the Order of the Star. I have not been able to find it yet. They were very influential in the city, being educators, being principals, marrying very successful medical doctors. But trying to I guess piece together other sisters that were very influential as well, like William Spencer, who was superintendent of all the Black schools in Columbus, the first Black high school in Columbus, and after him, his daughters were members of the Order of the Star as well, and they were very influential in the city. When William Spencer died, and his role was he was Secretary Treasurer of the Widows and Orphans Home. So when he passed away, there was a lot, still had to conduct business. So Butler was communicating to Spencer's daughters to get and tell them they're going to take over. So told everybody, send all your stuff to them for the Widows Home, because they're going to run it until we get somebody else in their place. So so his daughters were very influential in the jurisdiction as well.
Wow. Yeah, that was definitely not off. It was a lesson in that altogether. You started that when you, there was no position. You just went after it as a researcher. So it's a lesson in that altogether. All right. Do I have you back, Brother Gillard?
Yeah, I apologize for that. Hotel internet timed out. So.
That is okay. Yes, there was such a lesson in that. You doing your research. You did not have any titles or anything. And that's just goes to show that you can research. You can learn all you can learn. It's up to you how much you want to dig. As a member of these organizations. And I appreciate you so much for being on the Lambert podcast today. I always appreciate um the work you do and the information you put out on the sisters as well as the brothers. You always share information on the sisters and their contributions, and I appreciate that. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with me today. And we'll go ahead and go to closing remarks. Brother Gillard, you got anything?
Yeah, I guess I'll be remiss. One thing, I guess I get a lot of pats on the back for my research and the stuff I do, and I do it out of love. I don't do it out of titles. But since
Right.
this this podcast is about influential sisters, even though she's not technically, or maybe kind of sort of, because I remember she was a member of was it PYCH in Georgia, and that's Sister Ann Huffman. Um, I used to run into a lot of brick walls when I was starting this. I had the passion, I had the desire. I kind of had the direction, knew what direction to go in, and she took it to a whole different level. She gave me an anxiety attack. Our first conversation as to how many questions that she was asking me and stuff I need to be thinking about. And once she did that, I've used that to all future research projects. So when people look at the stuff I find, like find that William Terry was operating a bathhouse or just a spa, and that he was played a woman in a play, that's all because of her. Because all the questions that she was asking me about a person I try to get some assistance with, it always goes through my head. I'll never forget it. I run through it all the time, and that's how I can find so many details. That was something we talked about before the show about the article on the Sovereign Grand Commander Derry Vine. That's how I was able to find all this stuff. So we talk about influential sisters. She's definitely an influential sister that's still walking around today that we can still access. So I mean, this is and I thank you for your work. You do some amazing stuff. Your presentation is always excellent. So I appreciate the hard work and dedication. I know it's not easy. I know you got to go wake up in the middle of the night frustrated, probably want to throw something against the wall, but you just keep pushing through. So, so I definitely appreciate everything that you do.
Well, thank you so much. I know you can attest to this, but sometimes you like wake up after you research somebody so much, you dream about them. You're like, wait a minute,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on? But thank you so much. Thank you so much. But without further ado, thank you. And thank you to all the listeners of the Lambert podcast. And until next time, bye bye.